Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when a legendary rock star walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a lighthearted conversation and instead gets pulled into a fiery debate about the economy? That's exactly what viewers saw when Rod Stewart joined Loose Women to promote his latest music project, only to face Denise Welch on a hot-button issue. Should credit card interest rates be federally capped? The segment started casually. Rod joked about touring life, shared funny studio stories, and charmed the audience with his trademark grin. But the moment Denise pivoted the conversation toward rising debt, predatory interest rates, and the financial strain on everyday Brits, the tone shifted instantly. Rod, known for his charisma but not his political commentary, responded with sharp observations that caught Denise and the panel off guard. What followed was an intense back and forth, full of pointed questions, counterpoints, and audience gasps. The usually composed Rod Stewart didn't back down, and Denise Welch pressed harder than ever, her frustration growing with every interruption. By the time the cameras cut to commercial, the studio was buzzing, viewers were tweeting furiously, and social media had already exploded with clips of the clash. This wasn't just a music interview. It was a cultural debate with star power, money, and ethics all on the table. Fans at home and online were left wondering who really had the upper hand.
The studio lights of Loose Women glimmered as Rod Stewart sauntered onto the set, guitar case in tow and that familiar, mischievous twinkle in his eyes. The audience erupted into cheers, many standing as they applauded the rock legend who had defined decades of music with his raspy voice and unmistakable style. Denise Welch, ever poised and quick-witted, greeted him with a warm smile, extending a hand that Rod shook firmly, nodding appreciatively. "Welcome, Rod," Denise said, gesturing toward the audience. "It's not every day we get someone who's been topping charts since the '60s to sit with us." Rod grinned, brushing back his signature silver hair. "Well, Denise, I've been around a bit, haven't I? But honestly, I'm just here to have a chat, share a few stories, maybe make a few people laugh." The segment opened lightly, with Rod recounting humorous anecdotes from touring across the world, missing flights, and the absurd demands of some venues. Denise laughed along, occasionally teasing him about his flamboyant stage outfits and his penchant for storytelling. The chemistry was friendly, the banter easy, and even the co-hosts chimed in with playful quips. As the conversation drifted to his latest album, Rod leaned in, clearly enjoying the audience's reactions. "I've always loved creating music that tells a story. And it's funny, sometimes the stories are about life on the road, sometimes about life in general. I think people respond to honesty, even if it's a little raw." Denise nodded. "Absolutely. You've lived through so much, music, fame, and now the changing world around us. Speaking of change," she paused, glancing at the camera before continuing, "there's something I'd love your opinion on. Credit card interest rates have been skyrocketing, and people are struggling. Should the government step in and federally cap them?" Rod's eyes twitched slightly. This was a turn he hadn't fully anticipated, but he leaned back, exhaling thoughtfully. "Ah, now that's a topic that's a bit outside the stage lights, isn't it?" he said with a chuckle. "But I've seen enough people get caught in debt traps to know it's serious. No one should be punished for trying to survive or manage their finances." The audience murmured in agreement, appreciative of his measured start. Denise leaned forward, her tone casual but pointed. "It's become a real problem. People get these cards thinking they're safe, and then boom, they're paying ridiculous interest. Do you think a cap would protect them?" Rod's response was calm but deliberate. "A cap might help some, but it's also about education, understanding what you sign up for. People need guidance, not just limits. That said, there should definitely be guardrails so that someone doesn't sink under unfair rates." The audience nodded and clapped lightly. Denise smiled, sensing a good start, but there was a flicker in her eyes that hinted she was ready to press harder. "It's tricky, isn't it? Because these companies argue they need flexibility, but the average person bears the brunt." Rod leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees.
Flexibility's one thing, but exploiting someone who's already struggling is another. That's where regulation becomes important. You can't just leave people to fend for themselves. For a few moments, the conversation maintained a light but thoughtful tone. Rod told stories of friends and colleagues who had faced financial hardship, framing the issue in human terms rather than statistics. Denise listened, nodding and occasionally interjecting with her own examples, drawing laughter and sympathetic murmurs from the audience. Yet beneath the smiles and anecdotes, a subtle tension was beginning to form. The friendly banter was laying the groundwork for something more intense, a debate that would challenge both the star and the host, bringing the underlying frustration and stakes of this issue to the forefront. By the time the segment shifted toward current financial news, the room's energy had changed slightly. The audience leaned in, sensing that the easygoing start was just the surface. Both Rod Stewart and Denise Welch were about to step into uncharted territory, one where opinions clashed, and the friendly beginnings gave way to a heated confrontation that no one in the studio would soon forget.
The mood in the Loose Women's studio shifted subtly as the discussion turned from personal anecdotes to hard-hitting facts. Denise Welch, sensing an opportunity to dig deeper, leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. Rod, you're talking about guardrails, but let's be honest. Credit card companies are making billions while people are drowning in debt. Don't you think it's time for the government to step in with stricter limits? Rod shrugged, his usual charming grin slightly restrained. I get it, Denise. I do. I've seen it firsthand. People juggling bills, struggling to make minimum payments. It's unfair. But the solution isn't always a blunt cap. There's nuance, there's education, there's accountability. You can't just say, here's a limit, and expect the problem to vanish overnight. Denise tilted her head, her tone sharpening. Nuance? Rod, people are being charged 20, 25, even 30% interest. That's not nuance, that's predatory. Don't you feel the responsibility to speak out, to push for something concrete? Rod leaned back, crossing his arms thoughtfully. Responsibility, sure, but I've learned over the years that yelling at the top of your lungs doesn't always fix systemic issues. You need strategy. Laws without understanding can sometimes backfire. People need protection, yes, but also tools to manage their finances. The audience murmured, some nodding, others frowning, sensing the tension rising. Denise's expression shifted from curiosity to frustration. Rod, I respect you, but at some point talk isn't enough. People are being crushed financially. Isn't it time to put action above nuance? Rod's tone remained steady, his eyes locking on hers. I hear you, Denise, I do. But the problem with action that isn't thought through is that it can hurt the very people you're trying to protect. Say a strict cap is implemented, banks might just stop offering credit altogether, leaving people without access to emergency funds. Denise's voice rose slightly, her passion coming through. And leaving them at the mercy of their own wallets, that's better? Rod shook his head. No, it's not. But this isn't about extremes, it's about balance. Regulation must protect, yes, but it must also empower. We can't punish the system without giving people the tools to survive within it. A ripple of applause spread across the studio. The audience split between admiration for Rod's composed reasoning and frustration at the lack of an immediate solution. Denise pressed on, leaning over the table. So your answer is patience? Let the companies self-regulate while families suffer? Rod leaned in, his expression serious. Not patience as in doing nothing, patience as in doing it wisely. Action without thought can be worse than inaction. We need both, laws that protect and programs that educate. Both must happen together. For a moment, the studio was silent. Denise's lips pressed together, clearly wrestling with his answer. The co-hosts murmured, trying to mediate, but it was clear. The friendly banter from earlier had escalated into a real clash of principles. The tension was palpable. Rod Stewart's calm logic met Denise Welch's passionate insistence, and the audience could feel the stakes.
This wasn't just a conversation about credit cards. It was about fairness, survival, and the responsibility of those with influence to act decisively.
By the time the segment approached its midpoint, it was evident to everyone watching that the debate was no longer friendly. The clash had begun, and neither Rod nor Denise was willing to back down. The next moments would push both of them and the studio into the most intense confrontation yet. The studio had gone quiet, the earlier laughter and polite nods replaced by a tangible tension. Denise Welch leaned forward, her voice sharper now, cutting through the hum of the audience. "Rod, I've got to ask, you keep talking about balance and education, but people are losing their homes, their credit ruined, their lives stressed to the breaking point. At what point does your calm reasoning cross the line into indifference?" Rod Stewart's eyes remained steady, his tone even but carrying the weight of conviction. "Indifference, Denise? Nothing could be further from it. I care deeply about this, but shouting at the system or demanding quick fixes can create consequences no one intends. People could lose access to credit entirely. We need solutions that actually work in the long term." Denise shook her head, frustration rising. "Long term? Rod, families don't have the luxury of thinking long term when their bills are stacking, their children's futures are at risk, and companies are profiting off their stress. This isn't theory, this is reality." Rod leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "And I don't dismiss that reality. I see it. I've seen people struggle with debt, make mistakes, and suffer because of opaque systems. But you can't solve it by sweeping bans or caps alone. Education, transparency, and accountability must work hand in hand with legislation." Denise's hands moved emphatically, punctuating her words. "Accountability? How many times have you seen a bank fined only for them to shrug it off and keep charging 30%? How much patience do ordinary people have while the system drags them under?" Rod's expression softened, a hint of weariness crossing his features. "I know it feels slow, Denise, but reactive, rushed solutions often hurt more than they help. I'm talking about sustainable change, not headlines, not temporary relief, real, long-lasting reform that actually empowers people." The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, others clearly siding with Denise's urgency. Denise's voice rose again, sharper now, almost pleading. "Rod, with all due respect, families can't wait for reform to be perfect. Every month, people are losing sleep, losing financial stability, and feeling powerless. Your perfect balance doesn't pay their bills." Rod's gaze held hers, calm but unwavering. "No, it doesn't pay the bills, but it prevents repeating cycles of failure. We can't just slap on caps and pretend the problem is solved. Real solutions require understanding, education, and yes, sometimes patience. That's the only way the system can genuinely support people." The audience erupted in a mix of applause and murmurs, the emotional energy in the room palpable. Denise's jaw tightened, clearly torn between anger and begrudging respect for his measured stance. She gestured toward the camera, emphasizing her point. "Rod, with all due respect, people need help now, not in a few years when policies are perfected. They're drowning." Rod leaned in, voice steady, almost gentle. "I hear you, Denise, and I want them to be helped. But rushed, reactive measures can sometimes pull them under even faster. That's why thoughtfulness matters. That's why action without education can fail them more than it helps." The tension in the studio reached its peak. This wasn't a clash of politeness anymore. It was a collision of urgency versus measured caution, of passion versus experience. The air felt charged, the audience leaning forward as if they could sense the weight of the argument pressing down on both sides. For a long moment, neither spoke. Denise's hands rested on the table, fingers tapping, her eyes locked on Rod's calm gaze. Rod exhaled, his jaw tight, but his demeanor unbroken. This was the emotional flashpoint, the point where conviction met frustration and where viewers could feel just how high the stakes were. It was clear the conversation had transcended credit cards and interest rates. It had become about fairness, empathy, and responsibility, and the clash would leave no one in the studio unchanged.
The room was electric, the earlier tension now fully charged.
Denise Welch leaned forward, her voice ringing with intensity. "Rod, you keep talking about education and patience, but people are hurting right now. They're drowning in debt while corporations rake in profits. How many times do we have to witness families pushed to the edge before action is taken?" Rod Stewart's expression remained calm, but the firmness in his voice cut through the hum of murmurs from the audience. "I understand, Denise, I really do. I'm not saying people shouldn't get relief, but the wrong kind of relief, rushed, emotional, policy made for headlines, can make things worse. We have to be precise. We have to ensure the system protects people without collapsing under unintended consequences." Denise's hands gestured wildly. "Unintended consequences? Rod, these aren't theoretical. These are parents choosing between groceries or electricity, students deciding if they can afford textbooks. This isn't an abstract concept, it's real life." Rod leaned back slightly, folding his hands, speaking with a calm intensity that contrasted with Denise's rising emotion. "I hear you, and I don't dismiss the urgency, but imagine a cap that banks can bypass through hidden fees, or interest laws that reduce access to credit entirely. What good is a solution that inadvertently harms the very people it's supposed to protect?" The audience stirred, some nodding, others shaking their heads in frustration at the perceived detachment. Denise's voice climbed, almost pleading. "Rod, they're already being harmed. Every extra % in interest is another paycheck gone, another family under pressure. Don't you see that the system itself is failing? We can't wait for perfection." Rod's eyes softened, yet his tone remained measured. "Denise, I do see it. I have seen it. And that's exactly why we have to act responsibly. Quick fixes without a plan won't save anyone. They'll just move the harm around. What's needed is smart reform. Education for consumers, transparency for banks, and enforcement for corporations. That's the only way to truly protect people." Denise slammed her hand on the table, startling the audience. "Smart reform? We're talking about families losing homes and opportunities while you preach patience. How many more stories do we need to hear before we do something bold?" Rod's jaw tightened. He leaned in, voice steady, almost cutting through the heat of her words. "Bold isn't reckless, Denise. Bold is ensuring that the relief we provide lasts, that it empowers people instead of trapping them further. I care about families, I care about fairness, but chaos isn't bold, it's dangerous." The audience responded audibly, a mix of applause and murmurs, some siding with Denise's urgency, others with Rod's caution. Denise's eyes flashed, her frustration reaching its apex. "Dangerous? Tell that to the single mother paying 35% interest. Tell that to the student buried in debt because the system refuses to be accountable." Rod met her gaze, unwavering. "And I am telling them, Denise. I want the system accountable. That's why I speak for measured and forcible change. Otherwise, we're just playing a game of blame while people continue to suffer. I'm not blind to the suffering. I want it fixed, but we have to do it right." For a tense moment, silence fell. Denise's chest heaved as she leaned back, processing his words. Rod exhaled, a hint of weariness in his eyes, but still composed. The clash had reached its breaking point, not just a disagreement, but a moment where passion, frustration, and conviction collided fully. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the intensity, interjected softly, "Folks, I think we've all felt this. Both sides are right in their own way." But even her calm voice couldn't immediately diffuse the fire. Denise stared at Rod, the audience leaning forward, captivated. The debate had transcended interest rates and financial policy. It had become a confrontation about fairness, responsibility, and moral obligation. It was raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore.
The studio settled into a rare silence, the kind that carries the weight of everything just said. Denise Welch sat back, hands clasped tightly, her chest rising and falling as she absorbed the moment. Rod Stewart leaned forward slightly, the fire in his eyes tempered by the calm wisdom of someone who'd spent decades observing life and people. The audience, still on edge, seemed to hold its collective breath, as if afraid to exhale too soon. Whoopi Goldberg finally spoke, her tone soft yet deliberate. "I think what we just witnessed is more than a debate about credit cards or interest rates. It's about empathy, responsibility, and the tough choices we face as a society." Her words hung in the air, echoing the tension that had filled the room only moments before. Denise's voice, quieter now, reflected a shift. "Rod, I may not fully agree with your approach, but I see why you're saying it. You're not indifferent. You're just trying to make sure people aren't harmed twice by well-meaning solutions." Rod offered a small, sincere smile. "Denise, that's all I want. For people to be protected, for change to actually work, and for their struggles to be acknowledged. I don't have all the answers, but I care about getting it right." The audience, sensing the fragile truce, began to applaud softly, growing into a respectful ovation. It wasn't the cheering of victory, but the acknowledgement of honesty, vulnerability, and the complexity of the issue. Denise nodded slowly, a hint of a smile forming. Maybe this is what conversations should be like. Intense, passionate, and uncomfortable, but still rooted in concern for people's lives. That's more important than winning an argument. Rod's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on the camera, as if addressing everyone watching at home. Change doesn't come from shouting louder or blaming harder. It comes from understanding, from thoughtful action, and from holding ourselves accountable as much as those in power. The audience grew louder, the energy shifting from confrontation to reflection. Both Denise and Rod had delivered their truths, and in doing so, reminded everyone that real debates aren't about ego. They're about engagement, empathy, and sometimes compromise. As the segment ended, Whoopi turned to the camera one last time. Today wasn't easy to watch, but it was necessary. We saw the clash, the frustration, and the conviction, but we also saw the possibility for understanding, and maybe, just maybe, the spark for real change. Rod and Denise stood together briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. It wasn't agreement, but it was respect, a shared understanding that tough conversations are never easy, yet they are always essential. The audience rose to their feet, applauding not just the debate, but the courage it took to face these issues head-on. And as the cameras faded out, the room carried a rare sense of gravity and hope, a reminder that passion and principle, even when clashing, can leave a lasting impression on everyone willing to listen. If you like this intense discussion, make sure to subscribe for more live debates, fiery conversations, and moments that make you think twice. Drop a comment below. Should financial systems prioritize fairness over speed?